This week on the video version of the business of tech, the Mac renaissance and the PC resurgence, the quicksand that is the world of employment, the new White House memo on zero trust, IT spend goes up, right alongside the digital skills gap, and best in breed beats single vendor in the latest Okta data. All this and more. Hit those like and subscribe buttons, and here are this week's stories. It's tech earnings season, and let's talk about Apple's. A monster quarter for them, and while iPhone sales took the headline, Mac revenue grew 25% last year. This was driven by the M1 models released in 2021. Protocol highlighted a potential shift in enterprise IT around the Mac and the growth of the developer space. Jamf's CEO predicted that Apple would become the #1 device ecosystem in the enterprise by the end of the decade. An example from the earnings report, Shopify's move of its entire workforce to the M1-powered Macs. Of course, the PC is also seeing a resurgence. After Microsoft's earnings call, Microsoft product chief Panos Panay believes the PC's industry's pandemic growth is durable. Microsoft reported 25% growth in the revenue it gets from having Windows installed on new PCs, and the global shipments of laptops and desktops for the last quarter surged to surpass 90 million for the second year in a row, and sales for the year reached a level not seen since 2012. Are there other insights in the earnings reports? Intel had massive growth in their data center group, rising 20% due to strong server recovery in enterprise and government. Western Digital managed to handle supply chain interruptions and saw an 89% increase in cloud revenue over the year prior, but 14% declined sequentially, representing the significant decline in their revenues. Now, why do we care? Is it Mac or PC? The answer is yes. Not a zero-sum game, particularly in a world where the endpoint matters a lot less than it did. Let's acknowledge the diversity of endpoints as the key trend. IT increases the complexity of management process and the number of skills required. The other trend is the cloud. Note that Intel and WD's growth was cloud-driven. That's why the endpoint data is so essential. That space is messier than ever and should be expected to continue to increase in complexity. Will there be more Macs in the enterprise? I agree there will be. Will the PC resurge? Yup. Are they mutually exclusive? Nope. A few new updates in our continuing tracking of broadband and the state of play around regulation. The FCC has unanimously approved the so-called nutrition labels for broadband services. The plan requires disclosure of an internet plan's price, speed, data allowances, and including the introductory rates and later price hikes, as well as network management practices like throttling at the point of sale. The FCC has also announced $1.2 billion in funding through the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund to expand broadband service across 32 states. The FCC calls this the largest funding round to date and notes that 23 broadband companies will provide service to more than 1 million new areas. In addition, the FCC also introduced the Rural Broadband Accountability Plan, which will double the number of audits and verifications performed this year in comparison to 2021. It will also require the FCC to make the results of verifications, audits, and speed and latency tests public on the Universal Service Administration Company's website. And the FCC also clarified the rules around its E-rate program, ensuring that libraries on tribal grounds are eligible for the program's discounts on telecommunication technologies and broadband. With maps being the key to tracking, the state of Montana is the latest to work to build their statewide broadband map, hiring Lightbox for the work. Montana ranks last in broadband access, according to Broadband Now. Why do we care? If you believe that opening up broadband access is like the electrical grid or the interstate highway system, this is all continued slow progress. That's the specific, and the general trend remains increased regulation on tech. This should continue to benefit customers and cloud adoption. Adobe announced version 1.0 of their standard for digital content provenance last week, the ability to capture how a photo or video was captured and document any follow-on edits. This was done in conjunction with Microsoft, ARM, Intel TruePic, and the BBC. Adobe plans to release the code it used via open source so that others can include authentication data in their apps. Why do we care? With the rise of deepfake technology, a standard for validating digital data is important, and this one happened fast. Adobe wants this to go mainstream too, thus the release to open source. This is a key milestone. New York City has a new law in effect in May now, where an employer trying to fill a position based in New York City will have to advertise the minimum and maximum salary. This is one of the strongest pay transparency laws now in effect, and 8 states and several cities also have laws, and Massachusetts and South Carolina are considering similar moves. I've covered the 4-day work week before, and while buzzworthy, it's not prevalent. Just 1,700 job postings advertised 4-day work weeks for every million listed on Indeed.com in January. That hasn't stopped a bill being introduced in California to reduce the standard work week to 32 hours. Many firms are just changing their vacation policies. Twitter added a day of rest a month, and Google is now increasing parental leave and offering additional vacation time as part of its overhaul of its employee benefits. For workers, it's not necessarily a great set of news. While wages and benefits went up 4% in 2021 versus 2020 per the Employment Cost Index out late last week, prices grew 4.9% last year per the core PCE index. Americans in general are more unhappy than since the data started being collected in 1972. Per data from Pew, a complete reversal of the very happy and not too happy responses. For the first time, Americans are more likely to say they're not happy than to say they're very happy. Per PricewaterhouseCoopers Executive Views on Business in 2022 Pulse Survey published Thursday, 43% of business leaders plan to keep hybrid work options for employees, and 30% plan on making remote work a permanent option. In addition, 77% of executives see hiring and retaining employees as the 2 most important factors to consider in 2022. Why do we care? Workers are getting more transparency on pay, have greater choices and perks, are feeling wage pressure due to costs rising, and are generally unhappy. Anyone wondering why there's an upheaval in employment isn't paying attention, and it speaks to why 77% of executives are focused on hiring and retaining. My key observation: often business news is presented only in the context of the business itself. Particularly considering the pandemic, that is a dangerous set of blinders right now, knowing the context of employee sentiment involves more than just the job conditions. Last week, the White House issued a new cybersecurity strategy outlining a vision of zero-trust architecture for the federal government. The key document was published as a memorandum from the Office of Management and Budget, the administration's policy arm, and addressed to the heads of all executive departments and agencies. The memo called for a complete inventory of devices, and those devices to be monitored via specifications set by CISA. Agencies have 30 days to designate a lead and 60 days to develop an implementation plan. The implementation deadline is the end of the fiscal year 2024. Key elements of the new Zero Trust strategy include improved phishing defense through strong multi-factor authentication, consolidation of agency identity systems, encrypting traffic and treating internal networks as untrusted, and strengthening application security to protect data better. The EU moved as well. The European Systematic Risk Board proposed a new Systemic Cyber Incident Coordination framework that would allow EU-relevant authorities to coordinate better when responding to major cross-border cyber incidents impacting the Union's financial sector. Why do we care? Security changes are rolling out on both sides of the Atlantic. The federal government is moving at a pretty rapid clip to make changes. The guidance should be leveraged for implementations for private sector implementations too, as much expertise is going into planning. Use that material. Amidst that landscape, addressing the threat posed by ransomware is deemed the #1 cybersecurity challenge currently facing CISOs, closely followed by configuring cloud security and protecting hybrid, multi-platform enterprise environments. It's a problem in cloud containers too. Per research from Sysdig, 75% of containers have high or critical patchable vulnerabilities. Organizations take educated risks for the sake of moving quickly. However, 85% of images that run in production contain at least one patchable vulnerability. The analysis also revealed that 73% of cloud accounts had exposed S3 buckets, and 36% of all existing S3 buckets are open to public access. US websites aren't protecting private data either. A study announced last week by Zendata used GDPR as a lens to analyze US websites. Almost half of the sites, 43.2%, didn't offer a choice of opting out of having one's data being sold. The collected data actual use was deemed ambiguous for 41.4% of these sites. Zendata found that 54.9% of the sites lacked a cookie message on the first load, and 31.7% of these sites were not alerting users to cookies, also used as ad trackers. Website visitors are also getting tracked by device fingerprinting, which was the case for 43.8% of the top US websites studied. And Zendata's study found that 82.1% of the top websites use complex privacy policies that were difficult to understand. Now, why do we care? It's that last data point I wanted to highlight. Complexity is the enemy of consistency, and since security requires consistency over time, focus there. The more IT can do to improve policy simplicity, the more effective the policies will be. Think passphrase versus password. A phrase is a sentence, more simple for a human to remember than a series of random numbers and letters. Takes a bit more to implement, but results in greater effectiveness. TechIsle has released their 2022 SMB and mid-market IT spending forecast. The space is expected to reach $1.25 trillion in 2022. IT services are the highest proportion of that. Data center solutions will exhibit growth of 4%. Overall, worldwide cloud spending within the SMB and mid-market will grow by 21%. By 2025, 43% of global SMB and mid-market IT spending will be in the cloud. And, quoting the analysis, SMB IT investment is increasing to counter inflation, labor shortage, supply chain concerns, and accelerate business transformation through digitalization. SMBs are looking for ways to streamline business and IT processes to best return on existing human capital. Meanwhile, Logic Monitor's research report, The Next Gen Managed Service Provider, quotes some key stats. 88% of MSPs have experienced a brownout or outage in the past year. Most MSPs expect most of their end customers to be 100% in the cloud within the next 5 years. MSP leaders estimate that engineers devote 39% of their time to manual tasks. 88% say these tasks prevent engineers from innovating or advancing strategic goals. The majority of end customers, at 55%, are spending more and more each year with their MSPs. And in different data, just over half of managers in the UK are struggling to find talent with the appropriate technical skills, according to research from Udacity and Ipsos. The resulting lack of proper skills is delaying digital transformation, with 48% saying projects have been put on hold because of skills gaps. 48% of managers said they are struggling to fill tech-based roles within their company, and some have even complained of losing their staff to more techie firms. Why do we care? I don't think it should be shocking to anyone in IT services that spending increases. I am pleasantly surprised to hear the numbers indicating that MSPs expect their customers to be fully in the cloud, just as all the analysts predict. That's inevitable. Here's the trick. The market is really good, and the pressure is on for skills. The need is increasing, yet the immediate needs can't be filled. Coupled with the reality of the employee having leverage in the current market, IT services companies had better become good at managing their people. Spend a lot less time worrying about your tool stack and a lot more worrying about your people. That's the real differentiator. Are you struggling with your internal processes? Babysitting employees? Constantly putting out fires? Eureka Process is here to help. With strategy consulting to help with your strategy, process help for building and optimizing tools, and V-screening to help with your talent hiring, MSPs trust Eureka Process. And the best part? Resources right on YouTube. Visit youtube.com/Eureka Process and subscribe and learn, because growth is intentional. Okta released its 8th annual report looking at which apps and cloud services on the Okta identity platform were the most popular from November 1st, 2020 to October 31st, 2021. The report found that, for the most part, Okta users tend to favor best of breed over the single vendor approach of the past. Microsoft Office 365 remains the most popular service, with AWS second and Google Workplace third, moving up fast with a 38% year-over-year growth. In an interesting twist, though, showing desire to avoid that single vendor lock-in, 38% of companies using Office 365 also used Google Workplace, while 45% also used Zoom and 33% also used Slack. 14% of users implementing a multi-cloud infrastructure vendor approach, up from 8% in 2017. This was all quoting extensively from TechCrunch. Salesforce released their Global Digital Skills Index research to examine the evidence associated with various aspects of the digital skills gap. There is much disconnection in the data. According to the Skills Index, nearly 3/4 of respondents, at 73%, do not feel equipped to learn the digital skills needed by businesses now, and even more, at 76%, do not feel prepared for the future. Only 31% of Gen Z respondents, the first digitally native generation, feel very equipped for a digital-first job right now. Just 17% of baby boomers believe they are very equipped now for digital-first employment. Most senior leadership respondents, at 57%, say they are prepared with the digital skills necessary over the next 5 years. This contrasts with just 37% of managers. Why do we care? I paired these because, on the one hand, businesses favor more distinct apps in their drive to best in breed, while at the same time, it appears employees have a significant skills gap to overcome. Like the previous story, investing in people matters. But here, the story is about offering that as part of the service. The increase in training capabilities for some providers is apparent when viewed through this lens. Sell more training, not just implementation. Best-of-breed selection of products should be scary to those MSP platform companies. Businesses aren't buying what you're preaching, per the data. Avoiding single-vendor lock-in seems to be the dominant strategy. Financial services was the sector most targeted by malicious actors during the third quarter of 2021, seeing 22% of ransomware detections and 37% of advanced persistent threat detections, most of it linked to groups backed by Beijing and Moscow. According to a newly released threat research report compiled by Trellix, a new cyber company formed in January out of what was McAfee Enterprise and FireEye, It found that publicly reported incidents in the financial services sector increased by 21% between July and September of 2021 compared with the previous 3 months. That came from Computer Weekly. 1 in 7 ransomware extortion data leaks reveal critical business operational technology data, researchers from Mandiant Threat Intelligence reported. And 66% of organizations plan to increase their zero trust spending, particularly around micro-segmentation initiatives. However, a lack of relevant expertise and stakeholder buy-in still poses challenges. This is the verdict of a report compiled by Forrester analysts on behalf of zero trust segmentation specialist Illumio, which also finds the majority of respondents at 78% said they planned to bolster their zero trust ops this year. Still, only 36% have already started this process, and just 6% have achieved what could be termed full implementation. And in research from Anomaly, 87% said that their organizations were victims of successful cyber attacks sometime over the past 3 years. In this case, a successful attack is one that causes damage, disruption, or a data breach. Since the pandemic started almost 2 years ago, 83% of those polled have experienced an increase in attempted cyber attacks, while 87% have been hit with a rise in phishing emails, many of them exploiting coronavirus-related themes. A new twist on hacking. Per researchers at CyberReason, Iranian hackers are targeting a range of organizations around the world in campaigns that use previously unidentified malware to conduct cyber espionage actions and steal data from victims. And in some cases, the state-backed actors are also launching ransomware in a dual effort to embarrass victims and cover their tracks. That from ZDNet. And with the Olympics starting tomorrow, the FBI has been advising athletes to take burner phones to the games. The FBI advised athletes traveling to Beijing this month and those competing in the Paralympics in March to bring a temporary cell phone with them in place of their regular device in preparation for the risk of cyber attacks. Such attacks could include ransomware and malware, data theft, and distributed denial of services attacks, among others, according to the Bureau. Why do we care? The Olympics story is here because of awareness. The games will be loud when viewed from a media coverage perspective. The idea of athletes needing to secure devices will likely have some broad penetration. That's actionable to have a discussion about data privacy for sure. I wanted to note the strategy of those Iranian hackers, malware to cover up the data theft. With the data itself having value, it's not hard to see why. Safe to assume that may be happening in most cases too, mainly since double extortion is more and more commonplace. A quick review of the state of play around vaccine mandates within employers. Per a survey of employers by Mercer, nearly a quarter are already requiring vaccinations without a testing option, despite the Supreme Court scrapping the Biden mandate. And when including the 13% requiring vaccines or regular testing, the total becomes 44%. Another 8% require vaccines due to federal or state rules that remain in place, while 6% have plans to implement a mandate. On the counterbalance, 42% of employers have no plans for a mandate. If you're worried about the Great Resignation, maybe it's the Great Reorganization. Per Gartner's new report, 1 in 3 candidates who sought a new job in the past year searched internally within their organization first. Of course, that's not always well supported internally. Just 17% of candidates applying internally say their managers are helpful in the process. Just 20% say they feel supported by their peers. Why do we care? It's interesting to cover vaccine mandates as a competitive differentiator. In a market where retention is critical, it could well be. Your own mileage may vary, of course, but I'll continue to point to data showing the majority support mandates, and that private companies can do what they want here. The other key observation here is this. If retaining people is essential, why is such a disconnect on managers supporting it happening? Savvy leaders will be working on that. 17% is the realm of differentiators. Longtime listeners know how focused I am on the new world of work. This week has been good for thinking related to the topic, and there's a lot I wanted to share. People Asset's latest report confirms what we would have suspected. Employee engagement and retention has emerged as the worst hit aspect of organizations in the technology sector. 88.9% of leaders agreed that COVID-19 has had a profound impact on their organizations, with the same number observing that employee engagement and retention were the hardest hit. Insider covered disruption of Dropbox's culture due to remote work, highlighting the on-site perks, such as its famous cafeteria, as a blow to culture when the company shifted to virtual first, electing to change the offices into WeWork-style co-working. Quoting the piece, "Altogether," the former employee said, "the closing of the tuck shop was emblematic of a radical change to Dropbox's culture. Casual office get-togethers in the arcade or karaoke room became things of the past, undermining the openness and social connections that made Dropbox employees want to stick around." Of course, could be there's simply too much work. Recode looks here, considering that the noise about employers' concerns about remote work may all be baseless, and that the reason employees talk to one another less is there's simply more to do and not enough time. Observed data from both Microsoft and employee engagement platform Time is Limited has found that workers are communicating with fewer people at work outside their direct teams. Because while workers have gotten more time back via work from home, a survey conducted by economists at Stanford say that while half goes to more recreational time, the other half is going to work. They found workers saved about 60 minutes a day from not commuting and 10 minutes from skipping daily grooming tasks like showering, shaving, putting on clean clothes, or putting on makeup. The survey shows twice as many employees opting for hybrid working situations compared to those who are fully remote. And even physical jobs are going remote. Wired looks at physical jobs, such as forklift driving, that's going remote. Augmented by AI, Phantom Auto allows remote driving from anywhere, from self-driving cars to delivery robots. And one more I didn't want to miss, spotted in a piece about confirmation bias over remote work in The Atlantic. Quote, 73% of survey respondents who had teleworked because of the pandemic guessed that at least half of American employees had done the same. But the actual number of people who worked remotely because of COVID-19 was, at its highest point, roughly 35%, way back in May 2020. Let's skip ahead to the last month. About 90% of surveyed respondents who worked from home in August because of the pandemic guessed that at least 40% of American workers did too. In reality, only 13.4% worked from home in the final month of summer. Now, why do we care? A ton to unpack here. I'll start with the last data point. The broad swath of Americans are not working from home, and while we're having this discussion, it applies to a specific portion of the overall workforce. That's important to note. So within that subset, workers are getting their time back, but also contending with too much work, and without cohesive effort into culture building, are losing that connection to the organization. My top focus here remains on culture. Dropbox is a great example. Within the disruption, did leadership focus on investing in the new culture, or simply assumed the old would transfer over? The data confirms what we assumed. Engagement and retention is down, and there's certainly reason to believe there's more work being put on employees. No wonder there's a lot to consider in disruption. In the confusion, I continue to believe there's opportunity, both in getting it right internally and then helping others figure out what works for their organization, because one size certainly does not fit all. Thanks for tuning in to This Week in the Business of Tech. Shows come out each week, pulling together the daily podcast. If you like this show, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. The content here is possible because of supporters like you. If you want access to shows early, answers to your questions, and private interactions, join our Patreon. It's pay what you want. You decide what the content is worth. Join at patreon.com/MSPradio. Patreons also get access to the written versions of every story as they come out. If you want the stories right away, you can get them on the daily podcast. Find The Business of Tech on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your shows. Subscribe links at businessof.tech, and I'll talk to you again next week.